My family was deceived by their landlords, who promised them that after they built a fence for them, they would then sell the house they were renting from these landlords. And after this betrayal and my family getting evicted, I decided to get revenge, costing them thousands of dollars in the process, as well as a lot of heartache, simply because they decided to mess with my family. Here's what happened. So to start things out, this story happened quite some time ago. I have never tried to seek out revenge before, but the way these people treated me and my family was utterly repulsive. And so here we have my first ever revenge story. First though, let's have some setup. My family lived in a house that was owned by, according to one of my family members, benevolent landlords. After they had lived there for 2 years on lease, the lease expired, and so they started living there on a month-to-month basis. My family member by the name of Mary and John, those are not their real name, suggested that they renew their lease, but Mary, being convinced that they had established a relationship of trust with the landlords, insisted that there was no need to do so. And this was definitely the first mistake. Sometime after, there was a storm that knocked over a relatively flimsy chain link fence that was built around the house. Now, because Mary and John kept important things in their yard, they needed a fence. The landlords were looking around for contractors to rebuild the fence, but John had an idea that he felt would be beneficial for everybody. You see, John and Mary really loved this house, and they were hoping to someday buy it off the landlords. And that's something that the landlords had suggested as a possibility from time to time. John suggested that he build the fence instead. He would only charge for the materials required, and he would provide the labor at no cost, all under one condition. The landlords must promise that they have no intention of selling the house. One landlord, we'll call him Benny, not only promised John that the house wouldn't be sold anytime soon, but even went as far as saying that they would only ever consider selling the house to John and Mary. And so a deal was made. John would rebuild the fence more beautiful than it had ever been in its entire lifespan, and Benny and the other landlord would ensure that John and Mary would get to keep living in that house, as well as enjoying the fruits of their labor all the way until the landlords finally decided to sell the house to them. John and Benny agreed upon what the dimensions and material of the fence would be. They decided wood, and they decided on the fence being fairly tall. John bought the materials, and Benny paid John for the expenses. Halfway through building the fence, John asked Benny about whether he wanted certain changes in the backyard that would, alongside the fence, only serve to make the land value skyrocket. Now, when Benny heard this, he said that he would love those changes. But honestly, this was all too good to be true, because the way these landlords treated my family absolutely justified my revenge. Now, this next part is important. John looked Benny in the eye and said in no unclear terms, "If you have any intention of selling this house to someone other than us, tell me now and I will stop this entire project. I'm only interested in building this under the condition that I will be the one to get to enjoy it." Benny responded equally clearly, "You and your family will get to enjoy this home indefinitely. Feel at ease and do whatever you want with this yard." And so the fence was finished, and it was beautiful. And this is the part where I come in. I come to visit my family, and I help them finish this fence, as well as clean up the yard. I wasn't particularly happy about the terms of this agreement, but there was nothing that could be done now. But unfortunately, this is the part where my family gets screwed over, and badly at that. Not so much as a week after the fence was built, Mary gets a call from the other landlord. Let's call her Jane. Jane tells Mary that something unexpected has occurred. You see, her niece is currently on the market for a house, and she really wanted to see this particular house. Mary, who can feel herself getting riled up, asks Jane how this could be happening. The fence is only just finished and they're now considering selling the house. Jane assures Mary that her niece will most likely not want the house, but that she had to let her see it. Now, I'm not sure about the details about what happened shortly after, but it seems that Jane's niece didn't like the given price of the house, which was now more valuable than it was before, and so she chose not to buy it. Now, it might seem like they're out scot-free, but honestly, this is only the beginning. Benny came to visit John and Mary with something they had always wanted. Suddenly, the landlords wanted to sell, and an offer was made to my family. Now, my family is not wealthy, and they would have preferred if they had been told well in advance of the intention to sell. Nonetheless, the offer that was presented was not unfair, and my family said yes, which was excellent. But as soon as my family was approved to purchase the house, Benny came back with a change. The landlords no longer wanted to sell the house at the original price. Instead, the price they had in mind had now skyrocketed to roughly the same price as the most expensive house in the area, a price that John and Mary could no longer afford, and certainly more than the house was actually worth. worth. That's not the worst of it though. Suddenly, the landlords needed to sell the house immediately. John said to Benny, "I thought we had a deal." But Benny responded that they suddenly needed the money because of some family members' needs. Later on, the story changed to them no longer needing the money. And then it was Jane who needed the money because of some other piece of completely fabricated garbage. The point being is that they wanted to sell the house now just so they could line their pockets, but they could never stick to a single excuse. Again, John told Benny that they had a deal, and Benny's response was, "I don't remember that. We never got anything in writing, and so we never had a deal." Jane later told me, "A verbal agreement doesn't mean anything." Now, unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, nothing could be proven. We couldn't force them to sell the house to my family at the original price, and we couldn't force them to let my family keep living there. Okay, thought my family, if that's the case, then we want to get paid for the labor we put into the fence. This was not ideal, since they now needed to leave the home they lived in for quite some time, but they knew it wasn't theirs, and they weren't going to put up a fight over it. At this point, they just wanted to get paid for their labor. But you know what? Benny and Jane didn't want to pay. My family members needed that money. Given that they were kicked out on such short notice, the money was needed in order to find a new place to live. Benny and Jane, however, insisted that they had always been fair with the rent, and they simply didn't owe my family legally. I told Benny and Jane that we would just take things to court and have a judge decide the result. Given the fear of a court case, Benny and Jane decided that they would pay my family, but the labor for this gargantuan monstrosity of a beautiful fence just wasn't worth that much more than the materials it was made of. The labor couldn't possibly be that much, they reasoned. Also, they would only pay for the labor for the fence, not for the rest of the work that they had done to the yard. Well, everyone decided to get an estimate. The average we got was $3,000 for labor, with Benny and Jane managing to get one estimate from one of their family members at $350. And that's just an absolute joke. The day to leave arrived, and Benny and Jane paid my family far less than what the labor was actually worth. And eventually, my family left. We lost so much because of that. The effort that went into building this fence with the intention of getting to enjoy having it, and under the agreement that they would keep living there, just to then have it all taken away, and to barely even get paid for the labor. I mean, to get this kind of garbage was just awful. And you know what? To me, that was unacceptable. We simply couldn't win anymore. But I also didn't want them to win either. So this is when I decided to get some revenge. I read up on fences. I learned far too much about what was and wasn't allowed when it came to fences, and I memorized every single rule. I learned when permits were and were not needed. I learned what the allowed dimensions were. I learned about whether fences needed finish. And oh boy, the things I learned about fences. I learned that you don't need a permit if your fence gets damaged, so long as you're rebuilding the same fence. But this was wood, and the old one was chain link. I also learned that the fence needed to be painted, but this one that they built was not. Also, the fence had a very specific height limit, one which this new fence absolutely violated. These people were so happy to stick to the letter of the law when it came to screwing over my family, so I decided that I too would also stick to the letter of the law. Fast forward, and somehow the county found out that this fence was permitless, unpainted, and far too tall. Shortly after the county found this out, Benny and Jane got a visit from the county right before they managed to sell the house, and this is all at their obscene price. And what do you know it? Their fence was built illegally. Now, sometimes you could just get a permit after the fact, but their fence wasn't allowed to be built in the way that it was. There were no plans, no inspection, nor anything else that the county required. It simply had to come down. My family then got a very angry call. The landlords accused my family of never getting a permit, something that my family literally could not do, given that this was not their property in the first place. Besides, it was the landlords who assumed no permit was needed, and my family knew nothing about how permits worked, so the fence had to be torn down. There goes the money they saved by not paying my family, and they lost their prospective buyer. There goes the money they wanted to make, and the land value of the house absolutely went down. Their price point that they wanted to sell the house at was gone, and they needed to build a new fence, since no one will want to live in this house without some sort of fencing. So now it looks like they'll have to pay for an actual new fence, which includes labor and everything else from an actual contractor. So at the end of the day, we didn't win. But you know what? Neither did these people. And honestly, with all things considered, I will take that revenge any day of the week. Wow, that is honestly so infuriating. Can you imagine building that fence under the false promise that not only will you still be able to live there, but also they're going to try and sell the house to you at the end of it. I mean, Benny and Jane are absolute scumbags in this story. They're the worst kind of people on planet Earth. They went back on their promises and they really pulled a fast one on this family. So good for the original poster for getting revenge. These landlords absolutely had it coming. And if they were simply honest in their dealings, none of this would have happened in the first place. If you like Am I the Jerk, you're probably going to love Am I the Genius. Check it out, link down below in the description. Also, go to AmITheJerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for reporting my neighbor's son to the police after he repeatedly trespasses onto my property? Here's what happened. So I live in England. I own my home and I understand I am fortunate, but I also worked hard for it. Any money I received or earned while working part-time till graduation all went straight into my savings account. Most people on my street are social housing tenants. I'm still determining what that is, but they've explained that you're eligible for the scheme if you are on a low income. It's more secure than the private sector, as you mostly get assured tenancies, even though there are different tenancy types. Now, for a while, I got along well with my next door neighbors. We'll call them Emily and Ben. They also have 3 kids who are 13, 9 years old, and 4 years old. But soon enough, I started experiencing a lot of problems from next door. I work from home often, and I could hear shouting next door constantly. Ben is 5'11", and he's quite loud and intimidating, and I could hear the kids screaming and crying. I had asked them to lower their voices daily, and I even explained that I work from home. The next set of problems revolved around the 13-year-old son. I spotted their son climbing over a wall to get into my garden just to get his football back, and honestly, at first I ignored it, but then it happened 10 times in a row. I finally decided to speak with his parents, and I can't remember what was said entirely, but still, all I said to them was basically, I want to talk to you about your son trespassing literally 10 times in my garden. I would appreciate it if you would have him stop doing that, and if he instead would just come to the front and knock on the front door, I could then happily collect his ball for him. The neighbors apologized and said they would make sure their son doesn't do it and would knock instead. But a few days later, their son did it again while I was in my lounge. I walked into my garden, which made him jump, and spoke with him. I told him that I had seen him trespass to collect his ball on various occasions. I told him I had talked to his parents and that trespassing is a crime, and I would appreciate it if he could just come to the front of the house and knock on my door in the future. Well, he didn't say anything and just went back into his garden. I informed his parents and they apologized, but it still continued. I eventually got fed up with it and decided to invest in CCTV finally. I wrote a letter to residents on my road to give them a week's notice that private security footage is being installed at my address, and it will cover my entire garden, and it will also cover my doorway. I also wrote that I'm getting a Ring doorbell camera as well. After installing the cameras, I thought it would stop the kids from trespassing, but unfortunately, it absolutely continued. I saved the footage, I filed a police report against the son for trespassing, and I sent all of the evidence to the police. I knew there was a strong chance that nothing was going to happen, but I just wanted the son to have some responsibility. When my neighbors found out, they were so mad with me, and since then, our relationship has soured. My siblings found out about this and think that I'm a total jerk about this. So honestly, am I the jerk for reporting this kid to the police after I gave him and his parents so many times to correct this behavior? What should I do? I don't think you're the jerk at all. This kid was definitely trespassing on your property just to get a ball that he clearly is kicking into your yard on purpose. Like seriously, he can't just keep it in his own yard? Why is he constantly kicking it in your yard? Like that's unfair and that's really annoying. And what if this kid breaks something or worse, gets injured? I bet those parents would blame you immediately for any injury their son gets. So seriously, I would have done the exact same thing. I would have set up cameras and absolutely done the same thing. Because the parents are clearly not doing anything to fix this. They're saying, oh, I'm sorry, but they're not correcting their son. Like, come on. Your apologies does nothing. This kid is still breaking into my backyard to get something he can clearly have me get instead. So overall, you are not the jerk. I would not feel bad about this in the slightest. And honestly, there's nobody to blame about this situation other than your neighbors and their entitled son. Am I the jerk for telling my sister that she can't force our family to pretend like we like her daughter's name, especially when she named her daughter after my former bully? Here's what happened. So my sister gave birth to her first child 2 months ago and named her Olivia. The name Olivia has a bit of history with our family. To make a long story short, I was bullied by a girl named Olivia for years. My parents had to move out of our local small school into a bigger one, and it did not stop there. What started as an 8-year-old being mean and cruel at times turned into a 16-year-old being arrested for bothering me and making my life an absolute nightmare, and going so far that she was considered a stalker. It was so bad that from the ages of 12 to 16, I did not leave home without one of my parents or one of my older brothers, who were several years older than me. It was also so bad that my parents had to call the police on a few occasions where Olivia followed me home and was outside our house trying to get to me. To say that this was a huge ordeal for all of us is an understatement, and to say it left me with some mental scarring would be an even larger understatement. So when my sister announced that her daughter's name was Olivia, it was honestly a shock. My mom asked her if she was serious, and my sister grew defensive and said, "Of course I'm serious." She said that Olivia is the most popular name right now, and for good reason, because she thinks it's beautiful. My brothers told her that she was insensitive and that they had no idea she cared so little about me, which honestly only added to the defensiveness. My dad didn't say a lot, but he told her that it would take some time for all of us to adjust to the name. But she did not like that. I actually didn't say anything, but she started ranting and raving about how many people are named Olivia, and we're not treating or acting like that about them in the slightest. I wasn't there for the whole thing, but my mom and oldest brother apparently told her that she had every right to name her child whatever they wanted, but that they felt they were being very unfair to me, and that she had to understand that what I had been through was something that they would never fully grasp. My mom said that she is an adult, and she is old enough to accept that people have feelings, and sometimes those feelings will matter more than other feelings. Eventually, my sister contacted me directly after a few weeks of our family not coming around. She said it was all my fault, and that I should have been the one to say something positive about the name, and that I could have turned the tide with the family. I told her that was a name tied up with a lot of trauma for me. She called it absolute garbage and said that I'm old enough now to be mature about it and not take it out on her and her daughter. She wanted me to not hate a name because of a single person, but I also told her that she's old enough to understand that she can't force our family to pretend we like her daughter's name. I told her she is old enough to give us the time that was asked for, and that none of us said it was ugly or awful, but it quite literally is associated with some of my worst memories. She told me we were trying to influence what she could and couldn't name her daughter, and it made us complete jerks, especially me. So honestly, am I the jerk for telling my sister that she can't force our family to like her daughter's name, despite the fact that she named her daughter after my former bully? What should I do? Your sister is being a big jerk. She could name her daughter any number of names. She could go through a litany of other popular names and dodge the one name that's associated with a bully who made your life a living nightmare. I would never do that to a sibling. Your sister is being selfish and absolutely obnoxious, and there's no reason for her to be treating you that way. This honestly does kind of feel targeted in some ways. Like she's like, oh, I'm gonna name my daughter Olivia, and she knew for a fact that Olivia is the name of the person who made your life a living nightmare. Like, that is so inconsiderate, and honestly, it really does make a difference. So sure, you'll love the child no matter what. It's not like we're not gonna like the child when it's born, but the name itself definitely takes time to get used to and not associate with the person who made your life a nightmare. So in my opinion, I don't think you're the jerk. I don't think you've done anything wrong, and I think your sister is really being incredibly inconsiderate. This next story came from the Am I the Jerk subreddit. Check the links in the description and go to amithejerk.com/submit if you would like to submit your own stories. Am I the jerk for having anger towards my best friend after he participated in cheating with my ex for nearly 2 months before we broke up? Here's what happened. So for some backstory, this story takes place about 5 years ago. My now former best friend and I would always be together hanging out with our mutual friend group. We'll call him Devin. Devin is not his real name. Somewhere around that time, I started talking to a girl by the name of Maria, also not her real name. We would often frequent the store she worked at a lot of that time. I always thought she was pretty cute. She had short red hair, glasses that were kind of nerdy, she played video games and was a huge Harry Potter fan, and loved to talk about it all the time, to which I always enjoyed listening to her talk about it. Now, here's where our story really begins. Sometime after I gathered the courage to talk to her, we both started dating, to which I was more happy than I had ever been in my life up to that point. She would be the one to bring me out of my shell more and more, spending whatever time we could get off work together, which I always was thankful for. We spent Christmas and everything together, which up until then I had never done before in my life. After a year, out of the blue, she messaged me and says, I've been thinking a lot lot lately. I don't know if I'm ready for a relationship yet. I don't know about a long-distance relationship. For reference, we were a 30-minute drive from each other's houses, to which I guess that was understandable. So after a bit of back and forth, we agreed to split up. Within 24 hours of us breaking up, Devin, who I considered a brother who I lived with for a year and a half, I later found out they were at a bar to which some of our mutual friends saw them getting pretty close, if you know what I'm saying. They hid this from me for months, till one day in the middle of playing some games, my close friend, who we'll call Toby, blurts out that Devin and my ex are together. I then looked at him confused and I was taken aback. I responded with a bit of a nervous chuckle by saying, "What are you talking about?" He then proceeds to fill me in on everything. The following confrontation went as follows. I said to Devin, "Hey Devin, random question for you, man. Did you hear anything about my ex seeing anyone lately? People are saying she's seeing a guy I know. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Well, like a deer caught in the headlights, he looks up at me and says, No, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. That's weird." I then looked at him and I said, "All right, man, you're like a brother to me. I trust you." Of course, at that point, I lost all respect for him. I said to him, "I've seen the messages. I know you've been seeing her." He then flips the switch on me by saying that she's a grown woman and she can see who she wants, which he was right about, and I honestly couldn't argue that. From that moment on, he made it his vendetta to turn me into the most horrible human being ever birthed. Our mutual friends proceeded to message me within a few days, asking me how I could do that to him and that I have no right to interfere with their love. From then on, I've been looked down with disgust and anger by all of my former friends who were like a second family to me. This anger over that has still not gone away, even all this time later. I have made peace with the fact that things have changed so much. Now, do I think I could have handled things differently and handled my anger better? Of course I do. But you know what they say, hindsight is 20/20 after all. Fast forward a bit, and I learned that after a night of celebrating his birthday, Devin, who is a loud drunk, began to tell everyone at his birthday bash that he had in fact been sleeping around with my ex for 2 months before she ended it with me, and he was laughing the entire time. So am I the jerk for holding on to the anger of having all my friends turned against me? I don't think you're the jerk here in the slightest. Your friend is awful, and all of these former friends are complicit for not saying anything to you. Chances are they probably knew about this situation as well. They probably knew straight up that your ex was cheating on you with your best friend, and they decided to keep quiet about that. That is not a good friend in my opinion, and you do not need those types of people in your life. There's nothing wrong with holding on to the feelings that you have, and honestly, I don't blame you for being angry. I think eventually with time you'll learn to let it go, but right now with this all still ongoing, it's just simply so unfair, and you don't deserve this. So no, you're not the jerk for being angry. Your former friends and your former best friend and ex-girlfriend, they are absolutely the jerks in this situation, and that's something you absolutely need to remember. Thanks for watching. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications so you never miss a video. To finish listening to all the stories, check out the playlist at the top of the description. And if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Jerk, check out Am I the Genius. Everything will be linked in the description.